vision, leadership, workplace-related topics. The Voices of Victory podcast show. Subscribe today. Let's go.
Vision, leadership, self-esteem, workplace-related topics.
Subscribe.
The Voices of Victory podcast show.
Voices of Victory.
Vision,
Voices of Victory.
leadership,
Voices of Victory.
workplace-related topics.
The Voices of Victory.
Voices of Victory. Voices of Victory. Voices of Victory.
It's time for the show. You are now listening to the Voices of Victory podcast show.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mario D. Leone.
Hello and welcome to the Voices of Victory podcast. I am your host, Mario D. Leone, and today's episode title is The Body Remembers: Trauma, the Brain, and the Power of Narrative. I'm going to be clear, I'm going to be grounded, I'm going to be inviting. And welcome to the show where we talk about all things confidence, leadership, psychology, workplace-related topics. And if you haven't been here before, this is where we actually explore the truth. And today is the truth behind healing and human resilience. We're digging into something real, something universal. We're talking about trauma. We're going to talk about how the brain actually stores it, how the body responds, and how we begin to heal by reclaiming and working and rewiring the story. Because here's the truth. Trauma doesn't live in the past. It lives in the body. It lives in your system until it's given a voice and a place to actually land. Now, what are we talking about? Well, let's start simple. Not all experiences move through the body the same way. The pleasant ones, the safe ones, those usually flow right through you, no problem. But the nervous system takes in the information and the brain connects it to memory and emotion. And then the higher mind, the knowing self, or the gnosis part of our brain, that turns it into actual meaning. That's how we build memory. That's how we make sense of life. But trauma, that's a whole different story, literally. How the brain processes trauma is completely different. When something traumatic happens, the nervous system gets overwhelmed. It goes into survival mode, fight, flight, freeze. And the experience doesn't come in as one clean, solid, coherent memory. It comes in as fragments, and the brain builds resistance to it. Now think of broken bits of images, sounds, smells, sensations, little bits and pieces. Pieces of the moment, not the whole thing. And those fragments, they land right smack in the sensory part of the brain. The area that deals with the raw input, what we feel, what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we smell. And these little fragments, they're supposed to be passed along to our emotional and memory centers. Does this actually feel familiar to you? Right? And that's what the brain will say. Does this feel familiar? Is it safe? And then on to what's called the Gnostic brain. Let's pause here. The word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowing. So the Gnostic part of the brain is where we create meaning. We are meaning-making machines. That is our entire reality. It pulls together signals from different senses, like touch, sound, and vision. And this is where the brain says, this is what happened, and this is your story, to make sense out of it. And sometimes it may not make sense out of it, at least rationally. And this area lives in what we call the temporal and parietal lobes of the brain. And it's responsible for helping us recognize people, emotions, and experience within a context. It's the part of you that lets you say, that made sense. That experience somehow made sense. But trauma cuts off that flow. The fragments get stuck. They never make it to the part of the brain that actually makes meaning. So what you're left with is sensory chaos. One big, emotionally raw puzzle, bits and pieces little parts of memories here and there. The raw, unresolved data, unresolved information, millions of bits of data without a story, without a context, without closure, without understanding. It's one big, disconnected, emotional, traumatic puzzle. Now jump forward, and you're going about your life doing something completely ordinary, like pulling into a gas station. Suddenly, your heart races, your hands shake, you feel fear that you can't even explain. Why? Because your brain just matched the smell of gasoline to a trauma fragment from years ago. Maybe even a car crash you barely even remember. You didn't consciously think about it, but your sensory brain remembered a piece of that, a tiny sliver, and connected the dots really quickly. It picked up that one familiar piece of input, that one smell, and it sounded almost an emotional alarm. Maybe you started to have your physiology change, started sweaty palms, shaking hands, and your Gnostic brain, your knowing part of your brain, never got to close that loop. So the trauma remains unprocessed. And that's what flashbacks are. That's why nightmares happen. That's why our emotional reactions sometimes feel so out of proportion to the moment that we're actually in. Because the trauma isn't in the past, it's in the body. It's in the brain's incomplete story. And the way through is the narrative and the integration. So how do we process what we actually got stuck? Well, we tell the story, but not in a performative way, not in a social media claiming that it's a badge of honor in some way, shape, or form. Not in a way that deepens our identity as the wounded one, and the person that needs to be identified as the wounded one, the one with the most pain. We tell it in a way that brings the heart and the head back into alignment. It brings the heart and the head shaking hands again. It's where the emotions get acknowledged, and the knowing part of yourself finally gets to say, this is what happened. This is what it means now. And when you speak your experience to someone, and someone maybe that you feel safe with, when you witnessed these accounts all over again without judgment, your body begins to release its grip. The fragments begin to form a whole. The memory gets integrated, reintegrated. You're not stuck in it anymore. You're remembering, you're processing, you're releasing. And here's the wild thing. Sometimes it only takes one conversation for some people, one clear, supported, intentional exchange. And when the story is told from presence, from the desire to heal, not to wallow or suppress, it moves, it shifts, it unhooks from your nervous system, and it begins to process. You don't have to carry it anymore. Victory doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. Victory means your body is no longer reacting like it's happening right now. It means your knowing self, your Gnostic self, your knowing part of your brain has caught up. The story makes sense. The emotion has moved through it all. The past is in the past. It only exists in the imagination. It doesn't exist outside of me or anybody else. And the present becomes livable again. And this is what it means to process trauma, to reclaim your mind, to give your body permission to let go. This is the Voices of Victory podcast. And today the victory is in remembering and processing, because it's all about the mind and the heart shaking hands again and processing everything that's happened. And now that's completely scary. That's completely frightening. But beyond that big dragon is freedom. Have a great day.